Well, hello. We're here at the CTV studios, and we have a local producer, Vince Faini, here, and he's planning on going on a long walking trip. And I was looking at the monitor instead of the camera. Big difference.
Okay.
Not good. Hello. We're here at the CTV studios. And we have a local producer here, Vince Faini, who's planning on going on a trip walking in Oregon to raise money. And we got him here because we'd like to know what he has in mind and if it's a good idea or not. So welcome, Vince.
Well, thank you. Yeah, a lot of people would want to know if it's a good idea or not, and I'm anxious to find out whether it's a good idea or not, because my view is only one of many. My view is not always correct, but I've given the subject of affordable housing a lot of thought since I was a kid. Now, I'm in my sixth decade, and so this is all I've thought about. And in the past 30 years, I have been really thinking about how not just people who have a good job can afford housing, but how everybody could afford housing, and how we have such a high percentage of housing that is so monstrously high. People can afford it, obviously, but it's barely. They're putting all their money into rents or mortgage. And part of the reason is that the banks have the majority of the holdings. The banks are into they have a high percentage. Very few people own their houses outright. So the bulk of the houses and the rentals and so forth are owned by a bank. And so people, whether you're renting or own the house, you're paying the bank the bulk of the money. So nowadays, because the vacancy rate is so low, and the market it's an owner's or landlord's market, they can afford to charge high rents, regardless if they owned a house outright and paid off years ago, or they're forced to charge high rents because of the current market, how much it costs them to buy the property. So it became apparent to me that it wouldn't hurt if the bulk of the population, if we as individuals and families and groups of people and co-ops and communities owned the largest percentage of the properties outright. So let's say you have a house that's $500,000, and and you got to pay the current rate, and that's say that basically to pay that mortgage would be a couple $1,000s a month. Well, how many people can pay a couple $1,000s a month?
Well, this sounds like a solution to a local problem that Eugene has.
It's nationwide.
Oh yeah,
and it's worse in some areas. It's better in some areas, but then the job market doesn't have them afford it. But regardless, it's nationwide.
So, what are you going to do to cure this problem?
Well, what I wanted to do to cure it is, obviously, I have a property, and I'd be willing to turn over that property. I've had it for years, and so I tried purchasing other people's property. I was uncomfortable presenting my property right off the bat for a couple of reasons. Because one, people say, well, that's a conflict of interest, and you're just being self-serving. And you always got to be careful about somebody's plan if there's a potential for them being self-serving, right? And so what they said made sense. So I was out around looking at other properties that were like repoed. And because of the current economy, and especially from the real estate bubble, you have a lot of empty houses that have been boarded up. So I thought, well, my gosh, wouldn't that be great? It could be a win-win situation. The banks have these properties that are boarded up that they're not making money on. I could go in and fix them up, maybe purchase them at pennies on the dollar, right, or the current market, and then fix it up and then basically turn it over to people on limited income. So instead of paying $600 a room, like a lot of places, landlords are getting $400 to $600 per room. And that's crazy. So if you buy the house and you own it outright, then that house basically could be sold to the people who are living in there, and in the meantime, they could pay half, 50% of what they're paying now or what the market demands. That will leave more discretionary income to food, little things like that.
Well, this is something that you're able to do because you own property.
Well,
but what about the audience? I mean,
well,
what can they do?
That's a good question. And the fact is, I wanted to emphasize that I could do that on my property, but I was out there looking to avoid any accusations of being self-serving. So I was out looking for other properties, and I was wanting to work with the banks and say, we could do this, we'll raise money and so forth, and work for Habitat with Humanity or other place in the community to get the ball rolling. So, but the problem is, much to my surprise, during the last depression back in the late 70s, early 80s in Oregon, I call it the Oregon Depression, when all the wood timber industry went out, you had 1 in 4 houses empty, 1 in 4, all right? Back then, you could buy the houses for next to nothing. You could pick up a duplex for like $30,000, okay? Because the banks, they consider that toxic debt to have empty houses, right? Well, nowadays, the banks are purposely not offering these houses for a cheaper deal because they want to control the price. It's like the diamond mines. They hold all these diamonds so they can inflate the price of diamonds. It's what they do with oil. So banks are doing this with housing. They're keeping the properties artificially inflated by not allowing people to purchase all these empty houses. But who's paying for that debt? The people who are mortgaging and so forth. So the only way to break this gridlock is to basically take my house and say, or it could be your house, or anybody wants to do it, they're invited to do it. It doesn't have to be my house. But we could say, okay, lots of equity, very little owed, need some repairs. Let's raise money, work as a community to pay it off, get people in there, pay 50% at most of the current market rent or mortgage. That way, like when people own, like if you and I own a house outright, we don't have to worry about what the bank's paying the bank anything. All we have to worry about is property taxes. All we have to worry about is insurance and some of these other things, and utilities and repairs. So we could basically, if you and I wanted to just charge people, we could charge them anything. We could charge them, let's say the repairs and everything per month cost $500 for the household, okay, and there's four or five bedrooms. And instead of charging like $600 a month per bedroom, which is the current rate, let's say you're charging $300 per month, right? So that's $1,500 a month. So that $500 goes to expenses. You have another $1,000. You take that $1,000. You got 4 people who are happy because 4 or 5 people are happy because they're paying 50% of what they were paying before. They could afford to eat. They could afford to put that discretionary income into health care and other necessary things, which this is the core thing that we need is affordable housing. And if we make housing affordable, all other things will have more discretionary income for the more important things. So now all of a sudden you have that $1,000 a month. Well, what are you and I going to do with $1,000 a month if we have a house that's paid off? We don't need that $1,000. I mean, right? I mean, we could spend it and use it, but I propose take that $1,000 and put it into another house. And you get 4 or 5 other people.
Well, most of the people in the audience can't do these things. So what are you proposing?
Well, no. Most of the people as individuals, we can't do these things. I can't do this thing by myself. So that's why I'm calling on people for all of us to work together to raise money, and we can do this collectively. This is what I call guerrilla economics. So the people who have amazingly good jobs, and not saying people don't deserve amazingly good jobs, people who are in the top 2% or 10% of the income, they can afford to do this for themselves and maybe for their family members. We can't, right? So when you can't, when you're fighting with less resources, you got to fight as an army of, you got to, all of you work together. So if you get a dozen different people to purchase a property, then all of a sudden you could do things as a group that you couldn't do by yourself.
Now, how are you going to do that? How are you going to find a dozen people to agree to spend money because you come and ask for it?
Well, that's a good question. But then ask yourself this: how does any entrepreneur, anybody who's looking to build a company, how did Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak do it? They got investors. They got other people to work with them. They had an idea. Other people said, that's a good idea. We'll work with you. Let's draw up an agreement, and let's work together.
In that case, the motivation is greed.
Not necessarily.
And in this case...
Well, it depends on greed for what. Well, greed, desire...
To make money.
Well, there's other types of greed. There's other types of... Greed is a desire for something. And sometimes greed is in excess could mean I want more money than I need. I don't care about other things. But greed could also be... And I don't want to do that thing like in, Wall Street where he does that, greed is good. Because I don't believe that type of greed is good. I think it's toxic. But let's not use the word greed. Let's use the word desire. Let's use the word passionate about attaining certain goals. So, if you have, there's a desire not just for money, because what is money really when you come down to it? Because some of the richest people have all the money they want, but they're miserable because they haven't taken care of all the other things that I believe we need, that is essential for happiness and our spiritual growth. We need to attend to our spiritual growth. We need to grow as human beings in other ways than simply having a nice house and a big TV. And, you know, there are a lot of rich people who will attest to that. So what is desired is to build a better community. What kind of legacy can we build? What kind of mark will we leave behind? So some of us basically have the greed or the desire to build a better world. There's nobody who doesn't feel good by saying, you know, I left this world a better place. Nobody's going to say, oh, damn it, I wish I didn't leave the world a better place. I resent and regret feeding those people and helping those people. I resent and regret the community being a lot better. You ever see the movie with Jimmy Stewart? What was that Christmas movie? What was the name of that movie? What was his life? Yeah. What was the community's life like?
If he had a wonderful life.
A wonderful life. Now imagine if we all had the goal, the aim, of making that kind of difference in the community.
But
so that's a desire.
That's a major leap. Most people are competing to get more for themselves. They're not so much wanting happiness as financial security.
Well, most people, and they're brainwashed to do that.
That might be, but
they're brainwashed to do it.
That might be, but that's what they're taught.
Well, that's one of the things that I would like to talk to me about this deal with getting money. And you're right. This whole thing isn't going to happen unless we come to the realization that the people who just want all the greedy, they just want everything for themselves, and I'll do something eventually, maybe. I put that money in Salvation Army bucket now and then, that's good enough. The fact of the matter is we're programmed. That's one reason why I picked this shirt, okay? It's kind of like the Matrix. We listen to social contagions all the time. So we listen to like, we're nothing unless we have that nice house and car. We're nothing unless we dress a certain way. We're nothing unless we're this beautiful looking person and an athlete, or unless we have a degree from Harvard or whatever. And that's wrong. That's foolish. And so we also program ourselves a lot of negative things and say, I don't have any power. The system's against us. You know, I just want to kind of go and eat hot wings and drink beer and watch sports. You know, it's just too hard. Well, we have to learn that pain is inevitable. Pain is inevitable.
So what can you personally do?
Well, what I can do is do my best I can to raise money, to pay off a house, turn the house over to, and none of us have a shortage of people we know that are like, can barely afford to live or they're homeless, and put them in a place and give them a safe place, something they could afford with a lot of extra discretionary income. And then then you have a house that's paid off. And anybody, you talk to any realtor or any real estate investor, and I used to be in real estate and I know this, once you have a house paid off and you're getting income, it's easier to get the second house because you have this house paid off. Once you have this house and this house paid off with this income, it's much easier. The third house gets to be faster. So then it gets to be exponential growth. So within a generation or less, the communities could have and own outright people, whether they're just one person, whether a group of people or family or co-ops, can own properties outright. And it's not just that we should have that make a living for allow people to live more affordably. That's a definite benefit. But we need to get the banks to not have the stranglehold on us. And part of the reason why they have the stranglehold on us is we allow them. And I learned this by being poor myself. Is, you know, when you're poor, you start realizing I'm poor because of a lot of misfortune, things happen, but you're poor because you don't understand the mechanics of the game, of the system. And you're poor, sometimes you may understand the mechanics, but you basically have trouble getting out of bed and saying, I need to do this laundry list of things today to attain my goals. And that happens with anything, whether you want to be an athlete or the best student or whatever. You have to have a game plan and a blueprint and follow through. And I didn't always do that. I was struggling, and I know what it's like to be homeless. I know what it's like to just be, you know, figure life sucks and all that stuff. But there's a game plan of people working together, and some people, quite frankly, too many people, sadly, will want to be involved with what I'm offering because they'll recognize, even if they don't care about other people, that it's in their own best self-interest.
So what are you offering?
I'm offering people to come together, help pay off this place, They move in, and they'll continue to help each other and me
So
to help other people.
How do you get these people? You advertise in the newspaper? Or?
Well, I think once I go on the walk and I continue to talk about this, a lot of people are going to come out of the woodwork because they'll see that this is an actual plan, and they'll see if they check into my history. Because one thing you got to realize that whenever anybody comes forward and says, I'm going to try to do this, or I'm going to try to get all of us to do this, one thing people should be is skeptical, a little healthy skepticism. They should ask me, okay, well, who are you? Do you have any documentation about you? How do we know you're not a fraud? All these things can be need to be checked out. And so I would recommend checking into databases, like I'm the only Vincent Faini in the United States, and you'll see that I've gone through a lot of legal things, and you'll see that basically I nearly became homeless again because I wouldn't be bought out on due to principle. So money is not the top priority for me. My principle and having a way of living is in an ethical way is my top principle. But money is a tool that we all need, and so therefore, again, people will realize that I have a plan, and it's not a difficult plan to understand. It's simple math, and then they'll say, wow, this is great, and they'll see it right away. So there's two things that the only thing that's going to stop people from getting involved is their own. A lot of people have trouble simply getting started. And that's the thing. We have an epidemic of people out in the world today, and that's why we have the shootings, the mass shootings. It's why suicide has gone up over 30% in almost every state in just a couple of years. We have a nation of people who are just scared, and they're apathetic, and they're terrified, and they're caught in the loop. They're caught in a loop of anxiety and depression. And when you're in depression and anxiety, you talk about the same things. So a lot of people are saying, I hate Trump, the world's going to be destroyed. Before, a lot of people said, oh, I hate Obama, I hate Bush. We tend to look out into the world and say all our problems are caused by these people if only they would do the right thing. And so we ignore the things that we need to do, because one thing I noticed when I worked at the post office, one thing I still noticed is what kept people from being fully actualized. And I've worked with people who had IQs that were 15, 30 points above average, people who had multiple degrees, people who had a good job, so they didn't have the stresses like other people do. They had, postal job, government job's a good job, benefits and everything. So they didn't have the stresses, but they talked about the job and about their life as if they were helpless. So they made it to work every day, but they looked at the job as if it was a sweatshop. They looked at it like it was a salt mine. And if you ever seen Dr. Philip Zimbardo's Stanford prison experiment or study, he talked about the moment of the situation. And this is why it's very important that we program ourselves to be the best that we can and have strong positive beliefs, provided we have a good plan, not just some fanciful idea that we just jump off and say, I could do anything just because I want to. Got to have a plan. But in the Stanford prison experiment, he took out a hat. You're going to be the prisoner. I'm going to be the prison guard. And then all of a sudden you wore mirrors and you had uniform mirror lenses and so forth. And people fell into the role of becoming sadistic. I'm an authority figure. And the other people became depressed, anxious, and passive aggressive, And they started talking, we're helpless. And some of them started saying, this isn't really just an experiment. This is for real. And we'll never get out of here. So obviously that's kind of crazy and happened quickly. When I worked at the post office, you had some of the best. I mean, you've been a tree planter. I know. I've done tree planting. Tree planting was one of the toughest jobs I've ever worked, because you're not just planting.
It's like boot camp.
It's like boot camp, because you're not just planting trees, which is hard. You're on a hill, but it's not just that you're on a hill in rough terrain. You got to plant X amount of trees in X amount of time and do it just so, or you don't keep the job. It's one of the toughest jobs I've ever worked. So, man, Anyways, the post office, you're inside, you're warm, you're dry, you got 5 weeks paid vacation a year, 4 paid sick leave, you got all the federal holidays, you got all the overtime. Believe me, in working in the plant, you listen to books on tape, it's the easiest. But it was a phenomenon to go in and hear people talk about what a hellish conditions it was. And I've worked in the post office back east. And I'm like, why is it that the people back east who have from what they told me, they're just average people, barely high school graduates or GED, very few college-educated people. Why is it that they had a better attitude towards the post office than these people? Well, I don't know. I think maybe these people were so smart, they had more intelligence and more education which to complain about things. I don't know. All I know is that they...
Well, you know, different jobs suit different people.
Right, right.
You know, I mean,
right.
some people like sitting at a desk all day.
Yeah.
Other people like to get on their feet and
Yeah.
move around.
Yeah. Well, you know, and the thing is that back in Pennsylvania, and that's a good point. When I was in Pennsylvania, the people who worked at the plant there, the postal job was considered not the best. It wasn't considered the best job you could have in a good economy. It was like the last ditch. You got a government job not for the money, but for the security. Okay. So in a private sector, the same job would make you more money, but it wasn't secure. But so you go and in the government service, you could work 20, 30 years, get your civil service pension. So the majority of the people who got the job here barely passed the test. They 70% that passed the test, and they got in. So they were content. They figured, hey, I'm getting paid good, I'm working hard. Life's a bitch, anyways. Why am I gonna? I'm not gonna complain. The people here, back when I took the test here, 10,000 people took the test. That's how much in demand it was because the economy had gone down. We live in a campus town. People, as Joe would say, people who go to college tend to have higher IQs. I don't know, but they're in college. Anyways, the majority of people I talk to are more than proud to tell me what their IQs were, and I take them, after studying them, I believe them, that they're 120, whatever, 30, 40. Bright people, massive degrees. So they're desperate. They don't want to get their job in Detroit. They graduate, they would have to move to Detroit. They would have to move here. So a lot of them want to stay in a campus town. But there's no jobs. There's a postal job. Postal jobs have a reputation for being a gravy job, easy, not that backbreaking. Okay? And so they opted to stay here. Out of 10,000 people who took the test, only 2,000 people passed the test. That means only 2,000 got a 70 and above. Out of the 2,000 people who took the test, only 100 of us, me included, over a 5-year period, were allowed to matriculate in. So you could not get into the post office with a score under 95. So in a way, it's a slight intelligence test, the civil service test, you know. And so a lot of these people were intelligent, and they were very, very proud of their educations. But it wasn't so much that they weren't smart enough to realize that this wasn't the best job for them. Because my whole thing was like, well, okay, this isn't the best job you wanted. You wanted to be a journalist. You wanted to do this. You wanted to do that. Problem is, a lot of these jobs don't pay as well as this. But you could save up a lot of money and eventually go into journalism or eventually do this stuff on the side. Well, the problem is a lot of people tend, and we've all done this. I've done this. We've all done this. A lot of people tend to sometimes get focused on the negative. Oh, I can't. I don't want to take the chance. Or, and at the same time, they're talking about what the hell it is. Now, I can understand you really liking a job and saying, why should I take the chance? This is, overall, I'm not totally fulfilled intellectually, but this is a good job. And so they didn't do that. They hated the job. And they actually thought that and the thing is, a lot of supervisors were kind of like jerks. They acted like the prison guards. So within 6 months to a year, when I first got hired, after being a psychology major, I recognized that this was like the situation is a lot like the Stanford prison study, where the supervisors were the prison guards, and then you had these roving different crafts at the plant, and they were like roving gangs of prisoners. They're each their own little clique. You had the mail handlers, you had the clerks. You had the ETs, electronic technicians. You had the mechanics, the custodians. Then you had the carriers that came in. They were each, and they had different unique qualities to themselves. So you had these guys were, the mail handlers were more independent and took less guff. They were out on the dock. If they got in fights with each other, whether it was physical or otherwise, they didn't involve management. They said, what happens on the dock stays on the dock, right? And so, they tend not to take too much guff from the supervisors. So the supervisors left them alone because they were strong. They stood up more for themselves. The ETs, if the ETs got messed with, the computers and the machines didn't work. So they were left alone. Custodian guy was by himself sweeping and so forth. He's basically left alone unless they get a spill. The people who were the weakest, and by far the population of this group was the group that I was in, was the clerks, the manual and LSM clerks, automation clerks. And the reason why they were weak is because you train people to treat you in the way a certain way. If you train people or allow people to treat you like crap, they'll treat you like crap. If you don't, they'll be less likely to. And so there's a lot of backbiting, a lot of talk about how bad the place was. So we do this not just at the post office. It brought up my mind is nowadays, I don't work for the post office, but it seems like every time people come around and they have the same problems. We all have, a lot of us have the same problems. I need more money just to pay my bills. I need to have a more stable living environment. I need healthier food. I need to be fulfilled. We all have the same wants and needs. Forget about the big TV. Let's not look at the material things, but the basic, necessary, intrinsic things within us. We have them, right? And so, but the thing is, they spend most of their time that they could be utilizing, hey, let's put our heads together and figure out how we could help, shoulder the burden together. Because I think Jesus had some sort of analogy or metaphor or whatever, parable, where he talked about if you have one rope and how much weight one rope could have or pull, as opposed to a bunch of tiny ropes will pull. And so that's how we are, but all these tiny ropes. But instead of wanting to focus on that, people are so beaten down and depressed right now, is that they'll spend all their time coming in, and I train a person, and he comes in and he'll get on his phone and he'll Facebook, and then he'll get down and do a set. So he's not focusing totally on the workout. But he's on here reading about Trump, and he's reading about Roseanne Barr, and he's reading about all this stuff, and he's complaining and talking about all these things that, one, he can't do anything about. Two, the things he can do something about, he won't. And three, a lot of the stuff, I'm sorry, I have nothing against Roseanne Barr, and I have nothing against Kim Kardashian, but they're totally unnecessary to even talk about for me to facilitate my mission to walk and get property for people. Like spending all my time talking about Roseanne Barr, I'm not going to be able to plan and get all my stuff done.
You said walk?
Walk.
What's that?
Well, I'm going to go on a big walk. I like walking because I can't run because I got bad knees and bad back and I'm old. But I want to go on a long walk from Canada to Mexico. And I want to stop at different places and talk to people like different church groups, different social activists. But mainly this walk isn't just about purchasing house for the benefit of all. I also have this passion. There's so many other necessary social activist groups, organizations that are necessary. It's not just about affordable housing. It's about all the other substructures that people need, like Occupy Medical, Women's Space, Alzheimer's, Food for Lane County. They are providing necessary things that affordable housing in of itself will not provide. So many people will fall through the cracks. Like if we just had affordable housing only, a lot of people would still fall through the cracks. If we take care of feeding people and treating people in the streets, a lot of people fall through the cracks. So I advocate that all social activists work together to help each other raise money for their needs and to help bring resources and volunteers to help them with the task at hand and to become empowered.
Well, that's a good idea, but
yeah.
How do you get them all together?
That's the difficult part. That's like herding cats. And what I eventually want to do is I want to have a private club, a key club, where I only invite all the social activists and their members, like the organizations, so they have a place to work out, to sit on the internet, and to sit around and conspire and collaborate on helping each other.
So it's like the Chamber of Commerce?
Yeah, I don't know about Chamber of Commerce.
They get all the businesses together.
We'll get all this, sort of like that, to get all the people who are like-minded, who are passionate about more of community building than just making an income for themselves. Because even though Occupy Medical wants to make as much money as they can, it's not to line their pockets. It's to use for supplies and volunteers to help with the people who need medical care, urgent care, and so forth. Food for Lane County, they're not looking to, for junkets to go to yacht junkets or anything. They need more money because, they're doing better now than they ever have. They're providing more money and more services and feeding more people than they ever have. The problem is the gap of the people who have and have not is widening. So they're falling, but even though they're doing better, they're further behind the need than they ever were. So that's why we got to figure out a way of having all of us feel like, hey, this is fun to get involved. Because a lot of people, they're so tired, they're so depressed, they're so apathetic, they're thinking, why should we help you? It's everything I can do to get through the day, and darn it, I deserve a couple beers and a couple hot wings and watch TV. I understand that. We got to make this fun to where people say, I think it'd be more fun to go hang out with Vince and those guys and get involved with events, and we can still bring a beer, you know. Maybe it's not like beer is out of the picture. It's not like you can't have pizza. You could eat pizza while you walk, you know. So we got to find these ways of helping each other and make the whole activity fun and sexy and just happy-go-lucky and just, you know, and just have people get off, just feel empowered.
Well, that sounds good, and I and all our viewers wish you a lot of luck in this endeavor.
And some Bengay.
And Bengay.
And Bengay, yeah.
And maybe you can inspire others.
Yeah, I hope so. Because a lot of people have inspired me. Like a lot of the people, social activists, Sue Sarah Lupe, and all these people have inspired me. And I'm just glad that I finally found my niche on how I could help them to raise money for themselves, too. That'd be a great thing.
Well, thanks a lot, Vince, for
Thank you.
talking about this.
All right.
It's great.
From one tree planter to another.
That's right.
I didn't last that long. I wasn't that tough. Thanks, guys.